For those of you who may not know, the League of Women Voters is a national organization with over 800 local and state chapters. We encourage both men and women to join. If you are not a member, there is information on the table. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages informed and active participation in government works. It also works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. As you may know, Congress recently passed the Farm Bill. Tonight we are going to learn how federal policy influences agriculture and ultimately the quality and availability of our food. Our speakers tonight will help us understand some of the provisions of the bill and some of its ramifications. They also may have some recommendations of areas where we need to be concerned. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know another program we will be having next month. It will be about storm water, so please watch our website for more information. Our website is www.lwv/lflb.org. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers tonight, and you also will have an opportunity after they have completed their presentations to ask them some questions. The questions at that point should be directed at me. I'll repeat the question because we're on camera for cable TV, and then one of our presenters will answer the question. Our first presenter is Wes King. He is the Executive Director for the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, called ISA. Beyond executive management functions, the focus of his work is developing and monitoring sustainable agricultural and local food-related legislation in Springfield and at the federal level. In addition, Wes is working on organizing and building the capacity of grassroots stakeholders to influence food and farm-related policy decisions. On the national level, Wes serves as the co-chair for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition's Marketing, Food Systems, and Rural Development Committee. Prior to joining ISA, Wes was an organizer at the Illinois Environmental Council, conducting and organizing policy work for a statewide coalition of environmental organizations. Wes has a BA in Political Studies from the University of Illinois at Springfield. He also has an MA in Political Studies from that same institution. While working on his MA, Wes interned at the Illinois EPA and studied the effects of globalization on agriculture in Latin America. In his free time, Wes enjoys hiking, camping, kayaking, and organic gardening. Just a note on the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, for those of us who may not be familiar with it. He is the executive director, and the Illinois Stewardship Alliance promotes environmentally sustainable, economically viable, socially just local food systems through policy development, advocacy, and education. The Illinois Stewardship Alliance is a membership-based organization. Whether you are a local food producer, a concerned citizen, or food systems-related organization, you are invited to join. Alliance members span the state and have one thing in common: they all care about the food that is produced and consumed in Illinois and want to support the increase of fresh local foods. I am going to do the other introductions of our speakers. I think after Wes has had an opportunity to do his presentation, I think that'll be easier for us to remember who everyone is and what their specialty is. Wes has a slide presentation. I think we're going to dim the lights so that you can see that.
Okay. Should I just go ahead or wait for the lights? Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for having me this evening. This is, well, for a lot of people, some of this kind of, these type of issues are sometimes out of mind, out of sight, or a little wonky, or something they don't care about. I really enjoy talking about these kind of issues, so it is truly a pleasure for me to be here tonight. Uh-oh. Well, how's the, I'm come from a little further down south, so we actually had some decent weather. How's the weather been the last couple days here? Still cold and nasty? Monday? Yes. All right. So what is access to fresh fruits and vegetables, crop insurance, farm subsidies, farmers markets, environmental sustainability, food security, public health, nutrition, research, and local food have in common? The Farm Bill. Most of our country's population, and for that matter the world's population, live and work in cities and in a situation where rural America is often out of sight and out of mind. As a result, when people hear about the Farm Bill, they think that has nothing to do with them, and it's just something to do with the cornfields they've seen out the side of their window when driving along the interstate. Nothing could be farther from the truth. If you eat, then the Farm Bill impacts you. In order to overcome this disconnect, many people are beginning to refer to it as a food and farm bill, because it truly is a food and farm bill. For simplicity's sake, because a food and farm bill is a mouthful, I'm going to just continue to call it the Farm Bill. So what is the Farm Bill? The Farm Bill is a large, fairly comprehensive package of legislation that is put together, passed by Congress, and signed by the President approximately every 5 to 6 years. It took us a little while to get our most recent Farm Bill. The Farm Bill sets the policies, programs, funding streams, and shapes the food that shape the food system in our country and determine what food and farm products are available, how they are produced, by whom they are produced, what is done with those food and farm products, and who can afford to buy those food and farm products. As a total package, I think arguably the Farm Bill is the single most important influence over the food and farm system in our country. So, but to understand the Farm Bill, I think you need a brief history of what the Farm Bill is and where it comes from. The Farm Bill has its roots in the Great Depression. During this period, America was a hungry nation. At the same time, our most valuable resource, the soil in which we grow our food, was literally blowing away. To put this in perspective, so on a single Sunday afternoon in 1935, a storm in the Texas Panhandle literally swept away 300,000 tons of topsoil into the air. And that doesn't really mean anything, but so, for example, 300,000 tons of topsoil is twice the volume of soil that was excavated during the entire construction of the Panama Canal. One Sunday afternoon. During this time, more than a third of the U.S. population was barely getting by, living in abject grinding poverty. 1 in 4 Americans were living on farms. Farm foreclosures were becoming commonplace, and more sharecroppers and tenant farmers were actually being kicked off the land they were farming. At the same time, millions of Americans were struggling to find enough to eat. Ironically, this crisis was not triggered by too little, but too much food. A decade of overzealous and speculative planting, combined with technological advances such as nitrogen fertilizers and larger mechanical tractors and related technology, created a situation of chronic overproduction. Overproduction meant a lot out there in the marketplace, so that meant low prices, which was great for distributors, great for processors, but it really meant the ruin for family farmers. In order to stay afloat, farmers planted more acres, which in turn resulted in saturated markets and lower prices, which then led to farmers to plant more acres and to begin going into marginal lands and engaging in risky practices that farming where they probably shouldn't be, just to get enough to try to break even. In fact, though, oftentimes the cost of production was greater than what they were actually receiving for the products they created and sold. Total farm income fell by 2/3 between 1929 and 1932. Just in a matter of 3 years, 2/3 total farm income dropped. From this crisis, the Farm Bill emerged. Farm Bill actually emerged as one of the more ambitious and social, cultural, and economic programs ever attempted by the US government. A series of key agriculture and food policies that would later become the cornerstone of what we now call the Farm Bill were part of FDR's New Deal. The early New Deal Farm Bill policies were created to respond to a number of key crises. Rock bottom prices due to overproduction, hunger both on-farm and off-farm, catastrophic erosion and soil loss due to drought and poor land stewardship, a lack of financial resources for small farms, need of basic infrastructure in rural countryside, electricity, clean water, unfair export policies, and interestingly enough, related civil unrest. This was at a time in which there was a fair amount of unrest within the countryside. To this day, except I think maybe the unrest part, the Farm Bill seeks to address some of these same exact issues. It is one of the things that I think I always note right here that's interesting. The Farm Bill has always been controversial. From the get-go, it was a very controversial endeavor, or the policies that eventually became what we call the Farm Bill. So fast forward today. The Farm Bill, or policies enacted in the Farm Bill, have changed a lot since the ambitious days of FDR, but in many ways they're the same. One of the big differences or changes is what was originally meant as an investment in long-term stability and land stewardship has really over the years morphed into an engine of surplus commodity production. It's really driving increased production rather than taking a long-term, stable, stewardship-minded approach. Each Farm Bill usually has a catchy title. The one that they just passed is actually called the Agricultural Act of 2014. Some of them in the past have been like the Food, Farms, and Conservation Act. They're never really actually called the Farm Bill. I think the reason why it's not a catchy title this time is because it took them so long. There was such a level of fatigue when it finally came down to it. Just call it the Agricultural Act of 2014 and let's move on with it. So it's finally, the new Farm Bill is finally passed and signed into law earlier this year. I actually had the exciting pleasure of being in DC for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition's winter meeting on the day that the Farm Bill passed the House. And in fact, I was on Capitol Hill when it happened. We didn't know this was going to happen. This wasn't it wasn't planned that way. It just kind of ended up being, that way. So it was really exciting. So the new Farm Bill, it's slotted to spend about roughly $500 billion over the next 5 years. As I said, it's called the Agriculture Act of 2014, and it includes 15 chapters or titles. This is just, titles is what people in the farm world often refer to it. So, but these are 15 different chapters dealing with 15 different areas of food and farm policy. So here's a list. This is from the 2008 Farm Bill, but this is the same group of titles or chapters in the new Farm Bill. So for example, we've got the commodity programs or commodity title. This is where the subsidies that people often hear about come from. Subsidies for corn, soy, wheat, cotton, beans, rice. Then there's the nutrition title. This is where SNAP or food stamps comes from. A conservation title that helps promote conservation of the land and both wildlife habitat but also conservation on working farms. There's a horticulture and organic title. A research title that includes research related to organic, traditional breeds, all the way to biotechnology. Disaster assistance and crop insurance, credit title. You can see the list goes on. It really is comprehensive in what it's covering in terms of the food and farm system. Question for people in the room. What do you think is the biggest title in the Farm Bill? You probably know that. Yes, the nutrition programs. Most people don't know that normally. So the nutrition title is by far the largest title of the Farm Bill. And this is numbers from, this is for this new Farm Bill that was just signed and passed. 79% of all that nearly $500 billion within the Farm Bill goes to nutrition programs, with the remaining 21% being divided up for the rest of the 14 titles. to give the breakdown of that 21%. Well, one thing I want to back up and say, so of the nutrition, 95% of the nutrition title goes to food stamps. About 5% of it go to a number of other nutrition-related programs. One of them that's new this year is a SNAP food insecurity incentive. There's a program called Community Food Project Grants and food stamps for seniors at farmers markets. Those are all part of the nutrition title. Okay, so yeah, of the 21%, that isn't food stamps or the nutrition title, 45% is going to go to crop insurance, 23% to the commodity program, 28% to conservation programs, and 4% to everything else. And that 4%, everything else, includes research funding, energy on farms, or renewable energy on farms, trade subsidies, specialty crops. Specialty crops, it means fruits, vegetables, tree nuts, things like that, organic agriculture, local food. So 4%, all of that goes into it. Or that's all that there is for some of these other areas of the Farm Bill. So why does it matter? I think, to me, the depth of the Farm Bill speaks to itself. But I wanted to touch on a few things to paint a better picture of why the Farm Bill matters. To begin with, the Farm Bill impacts what we eat. It has a profound effect on the health and sustainability of our natural environment. It impacts long-term and short-term food security. It promotes equity in food access. And it affects the welfare and well-being of farmers and everybody living in rural America. So to drill down a little bit, how it impacts what we eat. Farmers plant what is profitable. Economic incentives in the commodity title, such as direct payments, which are actually, I'll talk about a little bit later, no longer in existence, but there are plenty of other subsidies. These subsidy programs create economic incentives that make farming commodities, corn, soy, wheat, cotton, and rice, makes it profitable because they're subsidized. But on top of that, crop insurance is available for these same commodities, and that crop insurance makes it stable. So the Farm Bill both makes certain things profitable and stable and helps mitigate some of the risk through crop insurance, which also has the long-term effect. One of the really negative from my organization's perspective of the subsidies is they have slowly been changing the structure of agriculture. One of the reasons why we have larger and larger farms and less of them is because the subsidies and crop insurance that farms are able to get allow them to have the economic position to expand, to bid on new farms, to expand and get bigger and bigger. So in effect, these subsidies not only structure what we eat, but are structuring the very nature of the food and farm system we have. The relatively lower availability and higher cost for fruits and vegetables within the landscape is due in part to absent comparable incentives. Fresh fruits and vegetables has no subsidies. Crop insurance that exists for fresh fruits and vegetables is basically not used because the programs are really, they have not been tailored to the farmers, and they're really just, they don't work for those farmers. This next slide's from the old Farm Bill, so the numbers don't quite match with the new one, but I think this really tells a great picture. People heard of My Plate? This is the new, it replaced the nutrition pyramid. So this is the recommendations for nutrition. It's a quarter fruits, quarter vegetables, quarter protein, quarter grains, and then they've got the glass of milk for a little bit of dairy. $4.3 billion spent on specialty crops in the last Farm Bill, $33.1 billion spent on commodity crops. That shows you where our priorities are as a country, and also should come as no surprise that it's relatively more expensive to eat fresh fruits and vegetables than commodity, generally, well, so meats and eggs and dairy products that have been made with these commodities or have been grown on those commodities. Beyond what we eat, the Farm Bill has a huge impact on the health and environmental sustainability of our country. Everyone has a right to clean water and clean air. Healthy and stable ecosystems are fundamental to all life on this planet. The majority of land in this country, in the US, is under agriculture production. So it should come as no surprise that what happens on farms has a huge impact on the natural environment that we all depend on. Tilling, synthetic fertilizer, and pesticide use can destroy the soil and negatively impact water quality. But the Farm Bill has within it a conservation title, and programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program or the Conservation Stewardship Program, all meant to help farmers implement conservation practices on their farms so that their farms have less of an impact on our natural resources, but also to help reward and incentivize farmers to continue to do the right thing when it comes to conservation and sustainability. There's also within the Farm Bill programs like the Conservation Reserve Program, which provides subsidies essentially to take land out of production, to put it back into natural wildlife states for habitat purposes, but also environmental services such as wetlands, cleaning and protecting our water resources. So this is kind of a general of why it matters. I wanted to give a few specifics because we can talk about it from the 2,000-foot policy level, but we can also talk about it, why the Farm Bill matters, from some specific examples. Value-Added Producer Grant Program. This is one of the rural development and local food programs within the Farm Bill that provides grants to farmers who are engaged in value-added production. Value-added means some sort of processing or transformation of that product to add value. In this case, the example is Kilgus Farmstead. They're located in Fairbury, Illinois, been in operation since the 1950s. They're an all Jersey cattle herd. And about 10 years ago, they started switching to a pasture operation and intentionally managed rotational grazing, which that probably means nothing to everybody here. It's over your head, sorry. So the cows are rotated basically every 24 hours in order to protect the soil. And I'm not going to go into it. So Kilgus milk, it's non-homogenized. They sell whole, 2%, skimmed chocolate, heavy cream, the whole gambit. They also have pastured beef, goats, and pork. They received one of these value-added producer grants in 2009 to help start their bottling plant. They now bottle on farm their own milk and distribute it throughout the region. A lot of the health food stores within the Chicago region, you can purchase Kilgus milk. Even down in central Illinois, where I come from, you can purchase Kilgus milk. This was really an important grant program that helped them to get the working capital they needed to expand their operation, to expand their outreach, to market beyond their small area of the state. It's been so successful for them, they've gotten their children involved in the operation, and they've gotten a value-added producer grant that's helping them to create business plans for their fully dressed goat meat line of product that they're in the process of creating. Another grant program through the Farm Bill, the Specialty Crop Block Grant. These are grants that the federal government gives block grants to each state to promote specialty crops. Again, fresh fruits and vegetables, nuts, and nursery plants. And one of the really great things about this money is meant really to promote these fresh fruits and vegetables. And one of the ways here in Illinois it's been really utilized, I think, in a good way, is through farmers markets. There have been a number of farmers markets across the state that have gotten specialty crop block grants to do advertising, to promote the fact that the farmers market exists, and this is a great place that you can get fresh fruits and vegetables. So TV ads, radio, print media, even using Bloomington Normal as an example. This is one of the communities, the Bloomington Normal, or the Bloomington Business Association, got a large specialty crop grant to do work with their farmers market as well as the Normal farmers market. And these have been really, really successful. Here's this is one of the ads that they put together. They had billboards with their logo up around Bloomington, all about promoting specialty crops. And the last specific example I want to give is the Conservation Stewardship Program. This is a program that rewards farmers
for doing the right thing who have already done the right thing. Farmers who have already gone the extra mile to implement conservation programs they're getting a small, people call them green payments. They get a subsidy for making a commitment to maintain their current standard of conservation while also saying, I'm going to do additional things. And as a result, they're able to get this green payment. The example here is Harold Wilkins, Jane's Farm, which is named after his daughter who died a number of years ago in a car crash. Harold, that's him and his son, Ross, born and raised in Danforth, Illinois, lived there most of his life, went to school at Illinois State University, and came back to the farm to farm. Harold farms 1,100 acres of certified organic corn, soybean, wheat, hay, and now with his son coming back to the farm, they're growing edible black beans that are sold into a distribution channel that end up at Chipotle. So he's been really on top of things. As an organic farmer, organic farmers have had to be more conservation-minded to begin with to figure out how to make things work. So he's using cover crops, things like filter strips. He has very long rotations rather than just planting corn, soy, corn. He's doing corn, soy, wheat, oats, and cover crops in multiple rotations to really build up the strength of his soil and the quality of his soil. So, and one of the things he's said before is that these CSP or conservation stewardship program payments they've been a really important part of his overall economic viability. His ability to continue to do what he's done and do more, having this small green payment every year as a part of this program gives him some of that stability to try new practices, to try new things to make his farm even more sustainable. One of the things that was really exciting for me, and something that I think really speaks to how important the work he is doing and the work like other farmers like him are doing and the need to reward that. So during the 2012 drought, my organization had put together a tour of his farm to highlight the conservation stewardship program. We invited the media and a number of congressional offices to come and see. This is the middle of July during the height of the drought. His farm was okay. He was able to show his corn versus going across the street and picking an ear of corn from one of his neighbors. And you could literally see the difference in the corn. And that was because everything he had done to improve the soil of his farm meant that it was more resilient in the situation of a drought. Okay, so the 2014 Farm Bill, like we were saying earlier, it was said earlier, it was just passed and signed into law. The ink's, in a way, still drying. And I kind of wanted to use the last few minutes to talk about some of the things that happened with the most recent Farm Bill. This was originally supposed to be the 2012 Farm Bill. A little late, but it's better late than never. So some of the things I want to touch on some of the things that happened with this Farm Bill. First, conservation and energy, subsidy reform, local and regional food systems, beginning farmer and ranchers, and then organic agriculture. And I'm going to try to just blow through these real quick, and maybe if when there's time for questions later, I can get into more detail. So conservation and energy, a big, huge change is conservation compliance. This is something conservation people have been trying to get for years and years and years, and that is relinking, and yes, I said relinking, they used to be linked and were decoupled over a decade ago, conservation and crop insurance. Basically, this says that in order to get a subsidy on your crop insurance, you have to meet basic conservation requirements. You can't till up wetlands and plant in wetlands. You can, but you just don't get your subsidy anymore. If you're farming on highly erodible land, so land that's got a certain pitch to it that it erodes easily, you have to have a conservation plan written and approved by the National Resource and Conservation Service in order to still get your crop insurance subsidy. There's also sod saver. This is a very similar. It basically says if you till up native prairie land within the Midwest or the Northern Plains, you no longer get the subsidy on your crop insurance. On the negative side, the conservation title of the Farm Bill received a $4 billion cut,
which this is the first time since 1996 when the conservation title was officially created as a full title that conservation has been cut. Every year prior to this Farm Bill, or every Farm Bill prior to this Farm Bill, conservation programs have gotten an increase. This is the first time there's been a decrease, a cut of $4 billion. Part of that is that conservation stewardship program I mentioned is going to be able to enroll 100 million acres less during this Farm Bill per year. One change, too, that's worth noting, EQIP, that's Environmental Quality Incentive Programs. These are cost-share grants that farmers can get help to implement conservation programs. Only slightly cut, but on what's really kind of disappointing, yeah, you see I have CAFOs, question mark. The payment limit was increased to $450,000, which is really to the benefit of large confined animal feeding operations. One of the things that EQIP has funded to the chagrin of many within the sustainability world is manure lagoons, massive holding ponds for the manure produced by a confined animal feeding operation. Well, the raise of this limit means that more of this money will be available for those type of surface impoundments of manure and less available for smaller projects and, I think, more important conservation projects. A bunch of easement programs were consolidated. There's a Rural Energy for America program funded with $435 million. One of the really great things people have been asking for years is to prohibit that money from being spent on ethanol blender pumps. Past farm bills, that money could be used for ethanol blender pumps. Now it cannot. So subsidy reform, this is the big disappointment of the Farm Bill. Both the House and the Senate included historic reforms to the subsidy programs within the Farm Bill. Eliminating direct payments, that's great. That was included in both and in the final Farm Bill. But there was also some provisions to remove, or one, to limit the amount of subsidies farmers can actually get, a dollar amount, so you can't only get above, or you can't get above a certain amount. That was included in both bills. It was gutted from the final Farm Bill behind closed doors, so it is not part of the law. There was in both bills included an active personal management. So there's been this loophole where people who are basically not farming have been able to collect subsidies on top of the people who have actually been collecting subsidies for that farm just because of their legal relationship with that farm. Subsidies should go to the people who need them, not to people who don't need them. This has persisted for years and years. Both bills included provisions to close that loophole. Guess what happened to that? Behind closed doors, when they conferenced the two pieces of legislation, it was gutted. There was the Durbin-Coburn amendment that was included in both farm bills. It was really included in the Senate. A smaller, watered-down version was included in the House, which was basically, and yeah, this is our Senator Durbin, and this is the retiring Senator Coburn, guys on the two total opposite spectrum, sides of the spectrum, came together to say wealthy farmers shouldn't get as much of a crop insurance subsidy as those below a certain threshold. Guess what happened to that behind closed doors? Gutted. So this has really been, those combined to be what, really the major disappointment of the farm bill. These subsidies are the ones that are really driving those issues with the structure I mentioned, the consolidation, larger and larger farms. Thought there was going to be historic reform to it, included in both bills. What happened? Gutted behind doors. I said earlier, direct payments were eliminated. This is the subsidy people often hear about where farmers are paid regardless of what they plant. That's gone. Most of the money from that was plowed back into the Farm Bill, some of it into savings, some of it into new programs, but a lot into new revenue insurance programs. Okay, the good news to close on, so probably should wrap up, right? I'm going to close it on this one and not get to the beginning farmers or organic and just say both beginning farmers and organic did really good in the Farm Bill. Close with some of the highlights of local and regional food systems. The Farm Bill includes $1.2 billion in investment in local and regional and sustainable agriculture. This is a huge win. There's all the negatives about the Farm Bill, but this is a really bright spot that makes it somewhat of a wash. And I mean that as a good sense, because the other pieces are really negative. This is such a positive that, to me, it's a wash. So there's this farmers market local food promotion program that helps to promote farmers markets. We actually now have an Illinois Farmers Market Association in here in the state because of this program. Funding for that was tripled to $30 million a year. And it was expanded beyond farmers markets to include local distribution channels, things that people have, you might have heard the term food hubs. The specialty crop block grant that I mentioned earlier promotes specialty crops, been utilized by a lot of farmers markets and those within the local food world. Major increase from $55 million a year to $72.5 million a year. Community Food Projects grant program, which helps food insecure communities plan and do projects to take their lives into their own control, nearly doubled to $9 million a year. There's this new SNAP incentive program that I mentioned where it's going to have grants, $135 million spread out over 5 years, where as a result of these grants, people with food stamps are going to be able to get bonus dollars for purchasing fresh fruits and vegetables from farmers markets and other similar outlets. There's going to be 6 across the nation new farm-to-school pilots funded by the USDA to help figure out best practices for getting more local, fresh, healthy food into schools. And finally, that value-added producer grant program I mentioned got a significant increase, and it's going to have $63 million spread out over the 5 years. Okay, I will wrap it up there, and hopefully everybody will have some good questions, and I can maybe incorporate some of the other stuff I had when the time comes later. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Mike Sands. Mike has over 30 years of experience in sustainable agriculture, environmental conservation, and community-based economic development. Mike has worked on a broad range of innovative projects around the world. Now a senior associate of the Liberty Prairie Foundation, he served as the organization's founding executive director from 1995 to 2010. Mike's current interests focus on the integration of economically prosperous, ecologically sensitive farms and high-quality nature and turning them into vibrant, protected working landscapes. He founded and provides leadership to the Farm Business Development Center, a business incubator for beginning organic farmers. The Farm Business Development Center, with regional partners, is developing a land plan and business model for protecting high-quality farmland and developing a thriving, beginning farmer community to steward and manage that land. In 2008, Mike was one of the founding members and now sits on the steering committee of Fresh Taste, a new collaborative effort encouraging diverse local agriculture and healthy eating for all in Chicago and across Illinois. From 1995 to 2010, Mike served as environmental team leader at Prairie Crossing right here in Grayslake, Illinois. As a member of the senior management team, Mike provided leadership in the design and management of natural resources and farmlands in this innovative conservation community. He coordinated the project's ecological and design consultants and designed the environmental education programs for the general public and community members. Prior to moving to Illinois, Mike served as the managing director at the Rodale Institute in Emmaus, Pennsylvania. Joining the Institute as International Programs Director, he built on his experience living overseas, running small farmer development programs in Kenya and Panama and Costa Rica. For the past 2 years, Mike has led an effort to redevelop an old abandoned factory in rural Virginia. The redeveloped building is partially occupied by Virginia Chutney, where Mike serves on the board in his spare time. Mike spends early mornings stringing electric fence, fixing water lines, and watching lambs being born at Bean Hollow Grass-Fed in Flint Hill, Virginia. Bean Hollow Grass-Fed started with 100 Dorper ewes and 25 weaned Angus steers to demonstrate that livestock can be an effective tool to restore soil health and plant diversity. Mike works for the Liberty Prairie Foundation in a part-time capacity. Mike was a member of the first class at Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, and went on to receive an MS and a PhD in animal science from Cornell University. He's married with 2 sons who, not many of us can claim this. They were born in Kenya and one in Panama. A little bit about the Liberty Prairie Foundation, with which Mike is associated. It is nationally recognized as a leader in developing and supporting enterprises that build and strengthen our local food system while enhancing the natural landscape. The foundation provides leadership and financial support for local food system development, social entrepreneurship, land conservation, environmental education, and civic engagement. The Liberty Prairie Foundation has been working to develop a sustainable local food system since 1993. Over the years, they have built many innovative partnerships locally, regionally, and nationally. Please join me in welcoming Mike Sands.
Thank you very much. I think there was a typo in that last. 93 was 2 years before we were started. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be 2003, and I apologize in getting you that information. What I'd like to talk to you tonight very quickly about is really that little piece of the pie that Wes showed as the 4% and what that can do and what that means to local food systems, because that's really the part of the Farm Bill that has an impact in the development of local food systems, which interestingly are a major component of food and farm types of policy in these peri-urban areas. Historically, the Farm Bill has been, as Wes said, a food, primarily urban, primarily around food stamps and nutrition assistance programs, or a rural, the farm program. And the peri-urban, the suburban landscape has literally been, if not forgotten, certainly ignored. Many, just as an example, many of the programs in the Farm Bill in terms of funding support define the potential areas, the census tracts that work can happen based on density. And they're either rural, too rural for essentially any of Lake County, or urban, too urban and too dense for most of Lake County. So the local food systems, the stuff that we're working with now, really has been a function and recently recognized by the Farm Bill and USDA. John can probably tell you what these are, okay? What I'd like to talk to you tonight about is not what tastes good, what's good for you, but really about economics. In Illinois, $46 billion of food dollars leaves Illinois every year, and $2 billion gets recirculated in the state because we grow corn and soybeans. The economic potential is huge. That $48 billion, the total that you just saw, is a massive number. If you look at the local multipliers, the calculations are that it's either from somewhere between 1.4%. Can people hear me if I walk around? I have a very hard time standing still. But the local multiplier is somewhere between 1.4 and 2.6 times the value of the actual product in the local economy. And frankly, there's no lack of demand. Our problem really is production. Here in Lake County, that's a massive number. That's our food economic value of the local food here in Lake County versus right now about $40 million in economic activity on the 23,000 acres of farmland here in Lake County. That gap is a place that there's an enormous potential for economics, for food justice, for jobs. There's all kinds of benefits to focusing on that. Nationally, what's happening in Lake County, what's happening in the Chicago region, what's happening in Illinois is a simple reflection of the same trends nationally. This is not an outlier. In some cases, we may even be a little bit behind some of the national trends. If you look at just the basic economics of food and farm, can you hear all right? Yeah. No, because I'm on this other mic. Yeah. So one of the benefits, one of the opportunities in this peri-urban area is that we're relatively close to markets. In the city, we don't have enough scale to really grow large amounts. In the rural areas, we have some significant distance to scale that we need intermediate transportation, aggregation facilities of food hubs that Wes mentioned and other alternative distribution channels. But here in the peri-urban areas, we have this unique opportunity where we're close enough to the market that much of the product can move in either direct to consumer or very short chain wholesale. So that instead of 2 or 3 distributors, it may be 1 aggregator before it gets to John's restaurant. What that translates to is that the sales per acre, and these are numbers from on the left side, the $20,000 to $23,000, those are the 5-year average per acre on some of the farms working at Prairie Crossing, with a net of almost 30%. So you're at an operator return per acre of $7,000 to $12,000 an acre, versus somewhere around $225 per acre for corn and soybeans. Those numbers are from the Illinois crop statistics, and there are some assumptions in there on how much land is in beans, how much is in corn, what are the incentive payments, what are the yields, but those numbers are all very conservative. So you can see there's a significant, again, opportunity right there. If you look at Lake County, this is the area on our land use map that shows agriculture or farmland. The red is land that is not currently protected. The yellow is land that's in agriculture but is currently protected under any number of instruments. Public sector land ownership, private easements, deed restrictions, a number of other things that we've lumped all together there. There's about 23,000 acres total. If you look at that, at those numbers and use $25,000 an acre for gross sales with a multiplier of 2.6, you're at $1.5 billion. And to meet the estimated $200 million worth of demand for local food in just Lake County, we need about 8,700 acres, about 35% of the farmland that's out there in total. To start to address some of these issues, we put together a Lake County Sustainable Local Foods Working Group. This has been working over the last couple of years together. From 2011 to 2013, in a joint project, we looked at Lake County policies, went through any number of things, looking at zoning and planning, interviewing farmers, interviewing soil and water conservation districts, planning staff, and what we came up to is the primary constraint in Lake County, not surprisingly, is long-term access to land. The same the same conditions that create this market being close to an urban area, lots of people. The flip side of that is there's a lot more competition for that land. So prime farmland in central Illinois is $7,000, $15,000. So it's even jumped there. Here, you can't buy protected farmland for $30,000? Okay. So what would farmland roughly do you think? 15,000?
No, I think your number around 30.
Okay. Yeah. Right. There are additional constraints in terms of what infrastructure that farmland has. One of the challenges we have with most of these local food systems, a difference between that and corn and soybeans. The corn and soybeans farmer shows up, plants, can leave. Comes back once, twice to spray or to apply a mid-season fertilizer, leaves, and then comes back to harvest. In our local food systems, we have people on that land all the time. We're turning those crops 2 and 3 crops per year on the same piece of land. That requires irrigation, requires electricity, water for food handling, for processing, cooling. So there is a higher infrastructure need. These are some of the reports that came out of that initial work. They're available online at the Liberty Prairie Foundation website, libertyprairie.org. And I'd encourage you to take a look at them at your convenience. Essentially, one of the great values is that with these smaller units, we can actually tailor the production system to meet some of the environmental constraints that if you have a 40-foot wide tillage equipment or harvester, you can't do contour plowing, for instance, on a 100-acre parcel, or it's very, very tough. But if you're working in 4-foot beds that are 300 feet long, we can slide those around all over. There are obviously the other public health and the economic benefits that we've already been talking about. So what are we doing, the Liberty Prairie Foundation, in terms of trying to address some of these opportunities? We have a Farm Business Development Center. It's actually it's housed at the Prairie Crossing Farm, but it also works with technical assistance providers in Caledonia, Illinois, and East Troy, Wisconsin. It's a program that is funded in part by the USDA Beginning Farmer and Rancher program, which is in that 4% still piece. We're dealing, our farmers, and in a number of surveys that we've done both statewide and in the northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin area, have identified 4 major barriers. Technical assistance in terms of production, it should be actually production and business management, farmland access, capital, and market diversification. We're working primarily in the first 2. The Farm Business Development Center is essentially a business incubator, much like a technology incubator. Beginning farmers come, make an application to us. If they're successful in their application, they're given up to 5 acres of certified organic farmland for up to 5 years. They then use that time to build their markets, to build their financial records, and to, frankly, test themselves before they go out to start to look for the investment or debt that they're going to need to really increase their operation. We've had one successful applicant with up to 15 acres, but usually it's less than that. And we're trying to push them out. From the very beginning, we've been trying to graduate them into other opportunities. This is last year's class. Frankly, fairly white middle class, which you would expect in our area. We have an Indian immigrant, a Hispanic, and that's our diversity. A lot of women. And incredible range of stories. Matt and Peg Schaefer came to Prairie Crossing 7 years ago now, and are now our mentor farm family in conjunction with another farm family. They are regularly grossing $27,000 per acre. They now have a multi-farm CSA working as an aggregator as well as their own production. They have 2 farm sites, one in Wisconsin with sandier soils and one at Prairie Crossing with heavier soils. We have Luis. Luis grows Mexican, Hispanic vegetables and sells. Do I have any people here from Department of Public Health? Sells basically out of the back of his truck in Waukegan and Round Lake, and is graduating up. Raj, but that's not, we call him Raj because I can't pronounce his full name, but grows Indian vegetables, South Asian vegetables, and sells into a South Asian community. Greta Winkelbauer came to me 4 years ago and said, I really like these little goats. I want to make goat milk soap. And I said, ugh. My background in animal science really kind of kicked in, and I said, that's just not a real business at this scale. I just don't think. And she kept pestering me, and she kept bringing versions of her business plan. And I finally said, okay, I got some extra land. We actually used some of the land that wasn't appropriate for vegetable production and tillage for her pasture operation. Second year, she was selling at a farmer's market. A woman came up to her and said, I've been buying your goat milk soap for the last year and I love it. How much can you produce? And Greta said, right now I'm producing, I don't know, X, but I could ramp up. And she said, well, let me get back to you. A week later, the forager from Oprah Winfrey show called her and said, we've decided to put you on our 10 top gifts for Christmas nationally. And Greta's gone. Greta now is farming actually in Pecatonica, and she's delivering pallet loads of Greta's goat milk soap to Crate and Barrel for their national distribution system. So it shows you do never trust an expert. I sat there and told her it was a lousy idea, and she's grossed way more than anyone else in our system. On these stupid, you know how much of these little bars of soap you have to sell? So the final piece is kind of our land access piece. They have the 5 to 7 years experience. Where do they go next? That's been the challenge that we're really trying to focus on now. We're focusing initially on a kind of place-based focus. This is Prairie Crossing. This is Route 45, 120 for those of you who might identify it. This is the Lake County Forest Preserve District, Independence Grove. And in this area, the green is all protected land. The yellow is protected farmland. And the brown, couple of places of brown, is farmland that's not protected. So our current efforts are working in this area to try and move some of our farmers into that area. Our pilot program is at Casey Farm. This is actually a partnership between Conserve Lake County, the former Liberty Prairie Conservancy, the Lake County Forest Preserve District, and Libertyville Township Open Space District. The three entities bought 3 sections of the farm. Each had a slightly different primary interest in that property. In the case, for instance, of the Forest Preserve, they were particularly interested in a corridor for a trail connection, which came down from Rollins Savannah and basically ended here at a ComEd substation, and they needed to get it across to Independence Grove. By purchasing that parcel, that gave them a channel, and they're now making that connection. There is roughly 18 acres of farmland, depending on how much of this front area is counted. And Liberty Prairie Foundation and the Farm Business Development Center entered into a step back one level. Conserve Lake County worked with the Forest Preserve District to sign a 10-year license agreement to use the county forest preserve land in coordination with the Conserve Lake County land. The Farm Business Development Center and Liberty Prairie Foundation then leased that both of those parcels from Conserve Lake County, and then we turned around and subleased it to one of our graduates, Radical Root Organic Farm. That's an example of what we're trying to pilot. This is way more complex than we hoped. I can tell you that the amount of person hours that have gone into negotiating this work, if we're going to be charged against that lease, it would never work. But there were enough lessons learned that I think we can make some larger generalizations, and we're in the process now. We've just received a large grant to start to explore how we can do this kind of work on a much larger scale with potential partners like the Lake County Forest Preserve District, the Libertyville Township Open Space District, some of the corporate campuses that have large pieces of land, farmland. We have 3 corporate bodies that we're in negotiation with now to make anywhere between, the smallest is 11 acres, the largest is 76 acres, available for local food production with long-term leases so that people can begin to make the investments into the soil, into the physical infrastructure that is so critical. Those investments in the soil are the key to the environmental benefits down the road. Agriculture and conservation historically have been seen as, particularly in Illinois, as 2 extremes. They're both open space, but that was about all they had in common. The opportunity to make that a closer relationship with very clear and common goals and objectives around conservation, stewardship, biodiversity. The key component to make that happen is around soil health. And just as an aside, Wes mentioned the farm, I can't remember his name, Wilkins, Harold Wilkins, who, when you had the drought in the last 2 years, you could see differences. We have statistical data out of we have a 30-year study at Rodale when I was working there, comparing 3 different systems, a conventional corn and bean system and 2 organic systems. The organic systems took about 5 years to recalibrate the soil biology. After that, they outperformed the conventional systems, or they equally performed the conventional systems in terms of yield, outperformed them in terms of economics during conventional average weather, whatever that is. Interestingly, in drought years and in flood years, the organic systems significantly outproduced, and we're talking about the same crops. These are corn and soybean systems, but they're just organic versus conventional, outperformed the conventional systems. And the key to that is that soil organic matter, which is critical, that you can only get from the long-term lease. I apologize for going over.
Thank you, Mike. John de Rosiers is best known to us locally as the chef and owner of Inovasi restaurant in Lake Bluff. Inovasi serves contemporary American cuisine by synthesizing an array of culinary influences, including French, Italian, and Japanese. John delights in creating memorable dishes from ingredients that are locally sourced, and when appropriate, accenting them with others from around the globe. Items on his menu might include red quinoa from South America, white romaine lettuce from Illinois, scarlet runner beans from California, or turnips pulled from the ground while still very young, so they taste just like candy. John started his career on the salad station at Gabriel's in Highwood. After graduating from the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York, in 1997, John staged at Charlie Trotter's in Chicago, and then returned to spend 6 years at Gabriel's, where he served as sous chef, restaurant manager, wine director, and ultimately chef de cuisine. In 2003, he joined Bank Lane Bistro, where at first he prepared straightforward European-style bistro fare. Then one day he served some associates a few offbeat items he had dreamed up on the spur of the moment. When his associates exclaimed, "This is what you should be cooking all the time," John recalls that he woke up at 3 o'clock the next morning thinking about it, and the next day threw the menu out and changed everything. He says he draws inspiration from a variety of sources, from watching someone possibly on the Japanese version of Iron Chef, or maybe a song on the radio or a TV commercial. At Inovasi, John uses local and sustainable farms for meats, vegetables, and fruits. He personally visits each farm regularly and spends time with the men and women who grow and make the products. In addition to spending a fair amount of time in the kitchen overseeing not only the menus but also restaurant operations, John makes sure to enjoy his free time. A former Eagle Scout and Waukegan, Illinois native, John is most likely to be found outdoors traveling, camping, or playing golf. Let's welcome John.
Hi, everybody. How are you? So I don't do actually, chefs don't do PowerPoints. We'd rather spend time coming up with new dishes or talking to farmers or sleeping rather than making a PowerPoint presentation. So some of the things that I want to talk about are what we do at the restaurant and our retail stores versus what you'll find at a lot of other places. Some of the things that I think that should be better and what are ways that we can change that stuff. So when we opened the restaurant, one of the very first things that I was looking for wasn't actually to buy things locally. I was looking for better tasting food. I wanted products that other people didn't have, and I wanted to serve fruits and vegetables and meats and fish and things like that that inherently had better flavor than what everybody else was doing. So that was where the search for all those things began. And then we quickly realized that we needed a partnership with lots of different small producers, small fishermen, small local growers, and small farmers that raise animals that were producing the kinds of flavors that we wanted. So we talk a lot about at the restaurant about where we get things from and why we buy them and stuff like that, but it always begins with the way that things taste. Good farmers growing great vegetables in really good soils is the most basic fundamental way to not mess things up. If anything else, I think my creativity gets in the way of that sometimes. I think one of the criticisms we probably take more than anything else is that we're a little bit too unusual or too weird, and that's more of a personality trait of mine than it is anything else. But our ingredients are sound. We often have customers come up to us and say, why do your beets taste the way that they do? I don't like beets, and I love yours. My father said it to me last week. I didn't know that he didn't like beets. And I made him a beet salad, and he loved it. So we get comments like that a lot. But it's not because of anything that we do. We cook them simply. I think more now than probably in the past. But we have great farmers that grow fantastic, amazing stuff for us. One of the things that I think is important is that we don't buy things when they're out of season. The easiest way to keep all that money that leaves Illinois is to not buy asparagus from Peru for the 6 months of the year when it doesn't grow around here, or 8 months of the year. Walk into our grocery stores that we all go into every day, and it's filled with vegetables that don't grow around here in the wintertime. So it's funny, we live in an area up here where most people get everything they want right when they want it. And we're very fortunate to live in this kind of community. But there's a bad thing about that. When we want tomatoes, we get tomatoes. And it doesn't seem to matter to us that we spend 3 times as much money on tomatoes that are white and don't taste like a tomato in the wintertime. And so we spend a lot of our time and effort trying to work with local farmers and new farms coming up to actually get the products that we're used to having in the summertime in off seasons. For instance, we just started carrying tomatoes from a farm in Michigan. We're actually out of them right now because I think that they've misanticipated their demand. So we bought them for about a month and a half, and now they're out for another 2 weeks. So we were serving tomatoes in February for the first time in our 5-year history. And a lot of our customers were really excited about that. But the tomatoes taste great. They're grown in greenhouses. And even in the weather that we've had this year, they were still able to make a successful, profitable crop for us to have tomatoes in the off-season. So there are ways to do things like that. We just have to work hard at them. We have to demand a little bit different. So one of the things that we look for in a farm, sometimes customers will ask us, well, is everything that you serve at the restaurant organic? And I say no. I've always said that. Now, depending on that person's particular outlook, that will either go very good or very bad. Some people demand that everything has to be organic for them. And for me, that matters less. And I say that because there are different types of things you have to go through to be a certified organic farm. There's not only the natural process of what you have to do for what the government says, but there's also the taxes and other implements that farmers have to do to become a technically organic farm. For me, it matters much more to know who I'm dealing with, what is inside of their soil, how they treat things, what are the animals they have on their property, how they're growing stuff, where they're at, how do they deliver their product to me. I can buy, and in the winter we will do this because our market demands it, and we can't do everything we want. We'll buy organic arugula from 2 farms in California. We'll get it for about 9 months of the year from somebody in Indiana, but we have to, just to have it in our restaurant because we still have to be financially viable. We'll get it from California. That's much, much less sustainable than getting it from our guy who grows it for us in Grayslake at Teal Lake Organics, because he packs up all his stuff. He brings me 1 truckload. He drives a little 6-cylinder car, and once a week he delivers 85% of the vegetables that we use over the course of that week. That is, I know exactly what's in his soil. I know how great everything that is he produces and how it tastes. I know what he grows it with. I spend time out there with him picking it because sometimes we don't order enough, and I need to go pick it up on Saturday morning, so I'll help him harvest it. That relationship is much more important to me than if we have a stamp on it that says organic. So the point is, it's good to ask that kind of a question of the places that you go to eat at. All of the things that the government does, like increasing the amount of money that goes to local farms and helping to start up small things and stuff like that, that's all great. But you guys make a huge difference and a huge impact on what actually happens every single day to the local restaurants and to the local grocery stores. Think about what would happen if all of you walked into the restaurants you normally eat at, all the rest of the ones that are on here that aren't mine, and say, what farm did your chicken come from? And actually demand that they give you an answer. Most of them wouldn't have one because their chicken doesn't come from one farm. It's commodity chicken, and it comes from a whole bunch of farms, and it's raised in all kinds of not very great ways that you guys can go Google about. But if you guys started doing that, if everyone started doing that more and more often, that kind of thing makes a huge difference. If every other normal restaurateur said, you know, I had 20 people tonight ask me where our chicken comes from, what the hell is up with people? And then not just ask them, but say, listen, if you can't tell me who raised my stuff and what's in it, I'm not going to come back anymore. I want to go to a place that's giving me good food. Not just that's raised humanely and has good nutritional value, but that has the same kind of ideals that I think are important to me. If that happens more and more and more, all of a sudden, every restaurant around here starts to look and say, you know what, we obviously need to start doing things a little bit differently. And that change is what really makes a difference. And it's the fastest, most immediate way to do it. Because if every customer that eats out in our area goes to the 10 restaurants that we could all name off the top of our head within 5 miles of Lake Forest and Lake Bluff, and all of them were, and every customer started asking the same kinds of questions, they would change immediately. Especially when they started seeing people not come in and going to restaurants to do support local farms. It is the fastest, most effectual way to make a change like that. And it's also the best one because it doesn't require a big body. It doesn't require taxes. It doesn't require government. It requires us just saying, where'd that vegetable come from? What does that farmer do with it? Who slaughtered my chicken? Where does the beef come from? So it's not very difficult to do. It just takes a little bit of curiosity. So some of the things that, you know, it's funny. My dad and I we're very close, and my family and I were very close, and we have arguments about my father telling me that everything doesn't have to be organic, and we can't possibly grow everything like that in this country, and kind of the same things that I hear lots of people say. And I always respond, when he's overweight, and I respond, I say, well, Dad, you could eat 30% less, and we could grow less stuff. You know, and it's funny, but it's true. We don't really need to grow as much food as we do. And one of the hard things that we face in the restaurant is what we spend for our food is just about double what a normal restaurant will spend. Our beef comes from, a great example is our beef. It comes from Hoosier Beef down in Indiana. They're from Walcottsville, Indiana. They're on about 1,100 acres. It's all natural prairie land. They graze on 80 or 90 different types of flowers and natural grasses and things like that. And because of that, cows growing naturally, it takes just about twice as long to grow a cow on natural grasses that animal's supposed to eat as it does on corn. Well, that means it costs twice as much money to pay for that land for all of that time to grow that animal. Now ours also was processed in a very small facility. Small facilities for the processing of the animal cost 3 to 4 times as much as very large facilities. So when you go to a restaurant in ours and you pay $25 for a half-pound steak, and you go to restaurant B and you pay $24 for a half-pound steak, ours cost us twice as much money to produce as theirs did. So part of the reasons for that are, like we talked about the subsidies a little bit. We're giving money to grow stuff to make food cheaper. Now you're still paying for it. You're just paying for it with your taxes instead of paying for it at the restaurant. So there are things that that we can change in small ways, and definitely supporting smaller local farms and having a better understanding of where things come from and why things work the way they do. You know, why do we charge what we charge? Why do other restaurants charge what they charge? And all it takes is you asking questions. You know, if restaurants and places you eat at in grocery stores are not open and honest and forthright about where they get stuff and where it comes from and who did it and how they raised it, you know, start to wonder, well, what else are they not telling me about the products they carry in the store? You know, why aren't they sharing those things with me? Everybody, you know, at some point, we're all going, you know, at some point it's going to matter to everybody, whether it matters because you get cancer when you're 55, or it matters because you have to pay for the way that we're growing and the way that we're eating, you know, whether it's through taxes or things like that. Eventually, we're all going to have to pay for everything that we're doing to ourselves and for everything we're putting inside of our bodies. So I would rather pay for it now, a little bit at a time, than have a nice, long, healthy, you know, happy life, than have to worry about lots of other things that are coming down the road for my father. Let's see. That's a lot of it, really. And then the last part was, you know, how to change. And I think that I already talked about that a lot. You know, we're the ones that can do it. You know, ask Talk to your neighbors. Talk to your restaurants. When you go to Sunset Foods, ask them, why do you guys have this? Where does this come from? Why did tomatoes cost? Just ask your grocer. Why did tomatoes cost 3 times as much money, and they're white inside? Do we really need that stuff? And then ask yourself, do I really need to have asparagus in January? It doesn't feel like spring, right? It doesn't taste particularly good. It's not better than you get it from a local farmer who grows it, out in Prairie Crossing. So do you really need all that stuff? And if we start to change little things like that, ask questions more, change where we eat. If something isn't seasoned, don't eat it. You pay a lot of money for it, and it never tastes as good. And it's not as good for you. Plus, you had to throw it on a plane to get it up here. So the more that we all do little things like that, the more that the broad spectrum of changes will happen. And it'll happen very quickly. It doesn't take a lot to do. Start demanding more from yourself and from your restaurants and from your grocer. And then your neighbors will start to do it. And then their neighbors will start to do it. And everybody will start to grow, and all these little things will change and be more positive. And all that money that we send out of the state will stay in the state. And every little piece about it gets better. And we all live healthier, happier lives. That's it.
Thank you to all of our speakers for an incredibly informative presentation. We now have some time for questions. Mary, what time did you want to wrap up? Where is Mary? Okay, we have plenty of time for questions. So ask away, and I'll repeat the question for the camera. And if the presenters would use the microphone, again, for cable TV, that would be most helpful. Are there questions? Yes.
Exactly what makes a vegetable or a fruit organic?
The question is exactly what makes a fruit or vegetable organic? Who would like to take that one?
The organic is now, frankly, it's a regulatory term. It has there are very specific protocols that the production system, the farm, has to abide by to be certified organic. They're inspected, they fill out lots of forms. At its core, it's that you use no synthetic fertilizers or pesticides. There's a rotation program. Other than that, it's a lot, frankly, of legalese. John's point that if you know your farmer, the stamp organic probably isn't worth much. It's not worth as much as knowing your farmer. Where organic does have value is it is a statement about a commitment to the environment. And it gives you, the consumer, a certain amount of confidence that there has been a protocol that has been followed when you don't know the farmer. When I buy California or something from California that's certified organic, it's different than buying something from California that's not organic. Buying something local might be better than both.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It sounds complicated. The simplest, easy answer is organic is better than not organic, but it's not necessarily the best. It's not necessarily perfect. Knowing who grows your food for you and what they grow it with is infinitely more important than any label that any person can put on anything.
There are also there's some very tough areas that it's easier in vegetables. It gets almost impossible in fish.
Fruit's hard.
Fruits get dicey. Livestock gets dicey. So it's, and it becomes literally what a group in Washington, made up of people from around the country in the organic industry, agree to decide. And as you can imagine, like everything else in Washington, there's an enormous amount of debate when anything gets changed.
Well, I
The questioner said she understands fertilizer, but not pesticides being used on organic products.
In some ways, the pesticides is a bigger issue because pesticides are toxins by definition. And we hope that they are no longer present on the vegetable or on the product by the time you eat it. And there are often not recommendations, there are required withdrawal periods. You can't use X pesticide within 30 days of harvest or something. But there's no way to really test that. We can't test every product that goes through the chain. And we're literally talking about, you know, parts per million that actually make an impact.
Question in the back, gentlemen.
It's a question for Wes.
Okay.
One thing I've read about farm export subsidies, which I assume are also part of the farm bill, is that by enriching American farmers and subsidizing exports, we actually are helping to impoverish farmers in places like California. And is any attention paid? First, is it true? And second, is any attention paid?
The question is that he has heard that some of the subsidies in the Farm Bill, although well-intentioned, go to primarily farmers in this nation and might actually help impoverish in terms of making it less competitive, I suppose, for farmers in other countries to compete against American farmers.
Was there a second part?
Is there any attention paid? I realize the Farm Bill is written in America for Americans, but there's a larger issue.
Yeah.
Did anybody address this?
He just wants to know if there's been any attention to that phenomenon.
Sure, yeah. So first to your question, absolutely, yes. In fact, that's kind of how I got involved in the world of agriculture. When I was in grad school, one of the things I was studying was the impacts of trade policy on Latin America. And as somebody who came from central Illinois, surrounded by farmland, I started asking, well, what are the impacts of these trade relations on farmers, and what is going on in the farmland where I come from? And yes, absolutely the case. The subsidies that we have for commodities, particularly, I think corn's been the big one in in Latin America, makes it real cheap. So we have cheap product that then we are able to export to these marketplaces. Their farmers can't compete, and what really we've seen, that's been one of the major drivers in migration from Latin America to the United States, is a direct result of our ag policies subsidizing these corn. Flooding the marketplace in Latin America with cheap subsidized corn means these individuals who used to be farmers growing corn where corn comes from for their local markets no longer have jobs, forced into the cities to work at maquiladoras, sweatshop factories, and many of those, when they can't find jobs there, end up here. As far as is attention being paid to that, within the Farm Bill debate, no, not really. You know, it is something that I know there's a lot of organizations and activists who have been trying to raise attention to that issue for a number of years, but it has not really entered into the mainstream debate around the policy of the Farm Bill.
I would just add that it's particularly in conjunction with trade policy. It's not just the Farm Bill work. If there was a different trade policy, the Farm Bill stuff would probably have very little impact. But the combination of the two is dramatic and complex.
Yeah.
Question?
Actually, that was a great question, and it came to my mind as I was listening to it. We're also exporting our water when we export crops from California, and water's going to be an issue. But my question is more local, and it's for Mike. John said, ask where things come from, and then I always ask where things go to. Is there room in your, I'm going to call it new farm or incubator, to have windrow compost farm so that our organic scrapings from our restaurants
This is actually a question for my good friend. Go ahead.
So do your farmers treat that soil the way you were talking about treating the soil with the lots of nutrients that I throw away with the leftover spaghetti?
The question has to do with using composted material to grow at local farms, I think is
Close the loop. When I eat this wonderful food that's grown it out here, and then there's a little bit of leftovers or something spoiled from the fridge, it all happens to us. Right now, I scrape it into a can, it goes into a plastic bag, it goes into a landfill. But if I could get that to a place where there was legal now, and then when I went to composting, then you guys could put it back in the dirt and bring the nutrition back.
On a technical basis, we could do that. But there are still dramatic policy constraints. You could do windrow composting of food waste, but it is highly governed and regulated. A farm is not almost impossible for a farm, particularly in this area, to become a licensed composting facility. So I can compost all of my stuff that originates on the farm, but I can't take your scraps and put them into our compost.
I can't even store them at the restaurant. And that's something on the Lake Bluff level. We can't have full composting in town for the amount that we would need to for the restaurant. We've tried.
Yeah, and they do it, and then they do actually do their composting out at a commercial site at Golden Lake Dairy. That is, there are, I think, 2 food waste composting sites licensed in Lake County. Midwest Organics site over there, and I'm not sure if the site in just west of Washington or Waukegan is still, that's permanent on that.
So what you're saying is there's no infrastructure for them?
No, it's less of infrastructure and it's more regulatory barriers. You know, the composting, the waste disposal laws in Illinois, particularly for composting, are not designed with anything like that in mind. They're designed the idea of massive, large-scale composting operations, and particularly, they're actually particularly restrictive here in Illinois, which has to do with the history of composting in Illinois. There was actually, I think it was in Lake County even, about 25 years ago, the state of Illinois banned yard waste in landfills, which created a whole new composting industry. Yard waste can't go into landfills, so it's got to be composted. What happened though, there were a number of composting operations that weren't really composting operations. They were accepting yard waste along with hazardous materials, garbage, and things like that, and composting it. And at that point, it was largely unregulated. So what happened, responding to this negative situation, the EPA came in, Illinois EPA really put the clamps down on regulating composting. Last year, the Stewardship Alliance, we worked with the environmental community to make some changes to the environmental laws surrounding composting to make it a little easier, but there's a lot more change that needs to be done. And unfortunately, the waste hauler and waste disposal industry is fairly powerful when it comes to Springfield and policy, and they have a business out of accepting these materials, in particular food scraps, into landfills. If that's getting diverted from a landfill and not going to landfill, that means less money they get paid to dispose of that. So there's some political factors that make it hard, and historically. The good thing though is I think things are incrementally moving in the right direction. When we were working on this last year for community gardens as well as for farms to be able to take a little bit from off-site, the EPA gets it. It's just a matter of we're talking about creating a tiered regulatory system instead of a one-size-fits-all. Not an easy task to do or create, throw in the political aspect of the waste industry, and it becomes even harder. But things are at least moving in the direction, and the Environmental Protection Agency here in Illinois is supportive of that. It's just, things move really slow in state government, in state agencies particular, it seems.
I had one other
Go ahead.
quick piece, and that is, I mean, there are legitimate concerns on the part of communities about odors, as an example. I point out that the single greatest problem of composting from an odor perspective are lawn clippings. I can compost all the food waste in the world that you won't smell it. It is very tough to compost lawn clippings unless I have an enormous amount of wood chips or some other very high carbon sources. So most of the complaints you hear about, I live next to a composting facility and it stinks, is grass clippings.
Ann Main, who is here in the back of the room, and she does happen to be the president of the Lake County Forest Preserve District. You had a comment.
If I may, I was just going to comment to your point out the third from the 60% recycling task force that Lake County put together to address it, to address the short lifespan that our landfills have. And we have waste haulers and specifically look at yard or composting. About 60% of the waste that goes in is food waste. And so looking at some pilot programs and things like that. So part of it is almost in terms of waste scale. I mean, the waste haulers weren't necessarily opposed to it, some of them are private places, but, who's going to do it enough so that it's worth their while? You're willing to do it, and then 15 of your neighbors are like, are you kidding? I don't want that stuff anywhere. So we're working on some pilot programs, but it's something that's definitely on, the radar, and, that we're trying to address, really from a different angle from the landfill.
And just commented that the county is working on some pilot programs with composting and landfills, and hopefully they will be successful in some of those pilot programs in the near future. Yes.
Yes, a while ago there was a task force in Illinois. Vicki Randy was on the task force. It produced a book, which I have here in my office at Elawa. I can't find it. It was going to try to address what Mike talked about, keeping production dollars in Illinois because all our money is going out of state. And the value added to us is like $8 more income in the community when $1 is grown locally. Mike, you discussed this. It was going to go into the state legislature to talk about incentivizing governments, prisons, schools to buy local, find local, keep the money in Illinois. Our state needs help with its budget. We're legal in voters, we're voters. Where did that go? How can agriculture help our local, our Illinois economy? Where did the task force go?
The questioner is asking about a publication that she thought Vicki Ranny had worked on that addressed some of these issues, and she's wondering what happened to that study and the pamphlet or book that was published.
Yeah, the study's still out there. It's a great study. So the study led to legislation in Illinois, 2009 Illinois Food Farms and Jobs Act, which created the Illinois Food Farms and Jobs Council. I'm actually the president of that. I became the president of it last summer.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Sort of.
Condolences is the other half.
Yeah, the government task force and councils, government likes to create councils and task forces and leave them to their own devices then. That's been one of the problems with the Food Farms and Jobs Council. It's been really slow to get going, working on things. It's basically an unfunded council. The law that created it has a number of benchmarks that the state's supposed to reach in terms of sourcing a certain amount locally by certain amounts, but none of them are binding. And it's really one of the things the council's found that I think plays to some of what Mike was talking about. We don't have the farmers or access to the land anywhere in the state of Illinois to come close to meeting those demands. So even if the state of Illinois were really to put some skin in the game, there's nothing out there to purchase. And then further complicated by one of the members of the council who's a farmer, we were having a debate this last year about this, whether we go in a different direction, whether we try to focus on this sourcing from state the state government sourcing locally. And he said, he's a farmer, he said, why would I sell to the state? Why would I sell product to the state when I have to wait 6, 8 months, maybe a year to get paid for it? When at a farmer's market, there's somebody standing right across the table with cash on hand. Or I can go to a restaurant that I know and I can get either paid that day or relatively shortly thereafter. There's just no incentive for farmers. There isn't a production capacity or an incentive for farmers to sell to those institutions. With that said, there's been some exciting progress recently that council's been involved in. None of it's, you're not going to see any of it because a lot of it's internal conversations with state government, but we're in conversations with the Department of Natural Resources right now for land access issues. The Department of Natural Resources owns something like 20 to 30,000 acres of farmland across,
I think it's 36,000.
36,000 acres of farmland across the state that they currently are just cash renting to corn and soybean operations. They're interested in trying to create some sort of pilot program, maybe at a state park that's got a restaurant or some sort of food service facility, to start getting farmers farming food on that land to sell into those, into the...
Well, Mike knows something about that. I was at
Yeah.
a conference he did over a decade ago at Prairie Crossing, working with the Woodland Reserve to say, well, let's get open land growing food. Mike, where did that go for you? You start, I remember...
It moves, it's
It
moving,
just takes time, right?
takes time.
I think
And
all
patience,
of it
and
for the time he's taken to do this. I know how long you've been at this. It's very patient work.
The-
Thank you, Mike.
the reality is, these are, when we're evangelizing, when we're promoting, we make it sound very simple. And the reality is, in large part, it's a matter of some fairly simple things like political will. On the other hand, there are real complexities that we need to acknowledge, and those are tough. We're 4%. That 4% of the budget is in many ways very representative of the actual interest nationally, not just from politicians, but from the general public. And so it is things like, Wes mentioned some of the pervasive impacts of the subsidies on farmers staying in corn and beans. One of the other things that he didn't mention is that there's actually historically been significant penalties in that. If a farmer took land out, an acre of land out of corn and soybeans to experiment with growing green beans, all of a sudden that compromised not just their subsidy payments on that acre, but it could compromise their subsidy payments on all of their acreage. That's a pretty big disincentive to experiment in something new. And so what happens is some of that's now changed. Interestingly enough, that was actually a condition that was promoted by the specialty crop industry in California, who didn't want Illinois producing fruits and vegetables.
Yep.
So what comes around goes around.
And I would just follow with one more thing, something, John, you said earlier when we were just talking before the program. It took us 150 years to get where we're at right now. It's, I hopefully it doesn't take 150 years to get to the next stage, but we're talking systems changes. We're changing the whole system of the way we eat and get food. So what looks like lack of progress is not lack of progress. It's just progress can be slow.
Question here in the row.
Correct.
The first question is, if you buy something that is labeled organic, does that mean that the seeds to produce that item were not genetically modified?
That has the USDA certified organic label. Sometimes people call something organic and it's not certified. They're not supposed to, but if it has that symbol on it, there's no GMO in it.
My second question is, I'm all for buying produce seasonally, but when you live in Chicago in January, what's in season? What are we doing? Can you give us a list or someplace to go?
The second question is, when you live in Chicago in January, and probably particularly this winter, what is in season that you could possibly buy that would be locally sourced?
So
Or
the fastest answer is things that store well over the winter.
Yeah.
So root vegetables, beets, hard squashes, potatoes, things like that. Or like I mentioned, things that are grown in greenhouses. We've got or hoop houses and things like that, which are kind of small greenhouses, like light greenhouses that are plastic instead of glass. But the Green City Market has a winter market downtown. I think a lot of people don't think of it because it moves inside of a small museum just up the road. But they still sell things, throughout the winter. Now it's a lot less and it's different, but the most fundamental change is we have to, to think about, I'm not going to have X, Y, and Z for 6 months of the year because it doesn't grow here. And it's a very, very different idea from what we are used to having and seeing for all of our lives. There's not going to be very many people in here that are old enough to remember a time when you couldn't walk into a store and get anything you can get now. And the more and more that we go down the road with having every product available every single day of the year, the fewer people are that remember when it wasn't like that. 100 years ago, we didn't eat as much beef as we do now per person. Beef was a luxury. I remember when I was a kid, my grandfather was talking about how rarely they would have steak. And now we have steak every day. I mean, it's nonstop. And it's like that because we've found ways to grow it cheaper. Not better, just cheaper. So, what we think of as kind of a birthright to have steak as much as we want to and have a burger as often as we want to, it's not really supposed to be that way. Your milk is supposed to really cost $6 or $7 a gallon. Not supposed to be $2.50. That's one of the big things where people said, if you don't pass X, Y, Z inside of the farm bill, your milk's going to go to $7 a gallon. Well, that scares everybody. Mm-hmm. The problem is you're paying for it anyway. You're all still paying for it. But I'd rather give my $6 or $7 for a gallon of milk to somebody who I knew grew it and what they gave their cows and how they did it. That's how things are. It's supposed to be expensive. You're not supposed to have a gallon of milk every 2 days in your house.
I think that the other piece of the answer is, this is also an issue of, it's not all or nothing. You're not either all local food or no local food. This is an issue. This is a spectrum. So what you can find local, give some preference to that. It doesn't mean, at the extreme, people used to go hungry in the winter too. Okay, but this is not something that any of us are arguing for. Although probably most of us, included, should be a little hungrier a lot more often. But it's not an all or nothing, but it's thinking differently, as John said. Good hearty stews with vegetables in them are great in the winter. Why are we doing that in the summer? Matt, we have people who come in June and ask for pumpkins. It's like, pumpkins in June? That's fall food. That's winter food. But we've gotten to this thing that something is available 24/7.
I'd just say one thing, and this probably not practical for everybody, or maybe. A chest freezer. I have a chest freezer. I freeze large amounts of fresh produce. I make fries. I make my own fries and freeze those in the freezer. I take kale and blanch it and chop it up and freeze that.
It really has nothing to do in central Illinois.
No, this is the thing is I actually enjoy doing this stuff, and that's where it's probably not practical for everybody else. But I dehydrate garlic and make my own garlic powder. There are things you can do, and again, it's not all or nothing. Maybe it's just a small piece of that, canning tomatoes during the summer or freezing. But it is possible to have a lot of this local food available in the winter. But it takes time, and maybe it takes somebody who's perversely has fun doing that kind of stuff, like me.
But it's probably cheaper to take your time doing that than it is to pay for the psychiatrist when you're stressed out.
And, you know, this,
That's your psychiatrist.
it doesn't apply to me because I don't have children, but I learned to do these things from doing it with my dad. I still, to this day, we do a lot of these activities together. We grow stuff and we bring it together. I go over to his house, he pulls out the canner and the dehydrator, we do this together. So these can be activities families with children can do, so there's an added benefit beyond just having a local food, the impact that has on the local economy. It could also be a family building, community building event.
That doesn't involve an iPad.
Right.
Doesn't involve an iPad, yeah.
Other questions?
I just have a quick comment about our neighbors to the north in Wisconsin. There's a great show on PBS called Wisconsin Foodies. Why is there not an Illinois Foodies? John? Why is there not an Illinois Foodies?
The question is, there's a show in Wisconsin on PBS called Wisconsin Foodies. Why is there no equivalent program in Illinois?
And just to comment on it, it's all about organic farming and different small farms that are producing small pigs, small cows, small goats, I mean smallest.
Yeah, scale.
Small fruits and vegetables, and they talk about the farmers market in Milwaukee, and then they also go into the James Beard Award and what restaurants have won it and why and so on and so forth.
I'm not really sure why there's not a TV show like that here. I can't speak to the market of. I know that we opened 5 years ago. Our next month, and in the 5 years we opened, maybe there's been one other restaurant that's opened similar to us in 5 years. So at least locally, there does appear to be very much interest in what we're trying to do. Now there could be all kinds of reasons for that, but if there was a large market demand for what we were doing, maybe there would be more restaurants, more hotels like that. There would be, there would be more TV shows about things like that. I wonder how much of us, I get grief. I know I actually don't enjoy the public part of what my job entails. I'm a shy person. I don't like being. I know that sounds funny to people that know me, but it's true. But so the point is, I get to listen a lot of times anonymously to what people say about the restaurant, and we get a lot of grief for being too. I had a guy walk outside, and I said, "We'll try the restaurant," and he didn't know who I was, and he said, "No, that place is too organic." And I was thinking, I wonder how many of the citizens that live around here think like that. And then besides that, what the hell does that really mean? It means my food is not full of enough garbage for you to eat. I mean,
It's too real.
So I know that we get a lot of grief for that, and the fact that restaurants in the area that use kind of normal, regular, everyday stuff are busy. If they're busy, that means that's what people want. People vote with their pocketbooks all the time. So I don't know why there's not a TV show. I don't want to be on TV. I just want to be happy, and I want the restaurant to be busy, and I want to be, we have 70 employees we take care of. I want those people to be happy and, care about that. Fair enough.
Oh, can I ask a follow-up question? This is a moderator question. I was recently together with some farmers from north central Wisconsin area, from Wausau Stevens Point. And they are very, very productive and profitable vegetable farmers in that area of Wisconsin. In fact, my recollection is they said they got 2 to 3 crops a season.
Yeah.
So why can that happen in Wisconsin and we don't see something like that in Illinois? Is there a difference?
Of course it can.
It can,
Yeah.
but there is a difference. The reason Wisconsin has so much more diversity in its agriculture, so you have these guys, you have dairies, you have small grains, you have all different kinds of things, is it's not very good at growing corn and soybeans compared to Illinois. In Illinois, you can go, with Illinois, it is perfect conditions for corn and soybeans. And so what do? We grow corn and soybeans. And together with Iowa, we're the best corn and soybean producers in the world.
It is difficult to convince a corn and soybean farmer to rip all that up and to plant something else they don't know how to do. We have a constant, I think we buy from 43 different farms now at different times of the year. and 38 of them, the farmers are nuts, and I mean that in a good way. But farmers are not. They're different, like the way that chefs are. The way I always talk about chefs being different from regular business people and regular citizens. Farmers are that way too. You know, when we first started the restaurant, I looked for one farmer to grow about 10 different really unusual products. 2 of them being the white romaine you mentioned, those little baby turnips. And I sent an email and lots of phone calls out to about 400 different farmers, and one of them said, I will grow custom crops for you. Out of 400 small farms that were already growing things like that, and one said, I'm willing to do something that's outside my normal comfort zone. So it's difficult to get people that are used to doing something, especially generationally used to doing something, to do something radically different, and to literally bet the farm on it. You know, so even though we know that they can make more money at it and be sustainable and have a better life and have a better impact on the environment and things like that, it's difficult to convince something that they know down the road, this will do X for me, with giving them a question of, maybe this will work, maybe it won't. It's just, you know, part of human nature. It's difficult to change things like that.
And it's risky.
Yeah.
It's risky for them. You know, the change, making that change is extremely risky when, if you're just doing corn and soy, is not risky because of the crop insurance subsidies, because of the other subsidies within the Farm Bill. It makes it safe. So if you've come from a farm family that's generationally been doing it this way, you've known it, you've only known how to do things a certain way your whole life, you're on land, it's nice, flat, you can get a massive combine, you can go along that land, you've got a bank that's willing to finance that because it's got federal subsidies for crop insurance and commodities that give some security to it. It's really hard for that farmer to throw all that away and take that risk.
We have time for one more question.
Actually, it's a multifaceted question. The first part is that we've been talking a lot about food for human consumption, but the subsidies that you talked about, a lot of that actually goes to corn, which my opinion is mostly for silage. So that we're subsidizing food that's not for human consumption. And Mike talked about the drought, and that's not something that's going to change, I'm afraid. Do you see a change in the Farm Bill over the next consecutive numbers of bills that'll shift that away from corn production for animal use to human food and deal with what Mike talked about, which is sustainable agriculture to stay here in the United States for human consumption? Because California is just the tip of the iceberg, I feel.
Hard question to repeat, but the questioner points out that a lot of the corn production in this country actually goes for silage to feed our livestock. And then she also points out that there has been, in light of the drought recently, is this still sustainable, or should we be focusing more on growing produce for human consumption? And perhaps with the change in our droughts and in global warming, I assume, do you foresee a change in the Farm Bill and so the policies that it attempts to implement through the economic policies that it promulgates?
I sure hope so, but if the last Farm Bill is any, you know, indicator, no. You know,
No is the answer.
they're you know, the national ag policy leaders are burying their head in the sand when it comes to climate change and the impacts that that's going to have on.
Who is behind that? Because I think that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room, is what we haven't talked about. And John made a great point, which is speak up, but there are people in Washington, there are local restaurateurs like John and others, but there are people in Washington to whom we should speak. But who's got their ear? 'Cause,
Yeah.
The question is, in Washington, who has the ear of the individuals who are creating the farm policy?
Well, you know, I would say when there's always the big money in the room that's an issue, but also it's kind of one of those the squeaky wheel gets the grease. This is not something historically anybody except those involved in farming talk to policymakers. And it's not going to be until urban legislators and suburban legislators hear from their constituents that I care about the food and farm system and what's happening to the farmers, what's happening to the land. It isn't until citizens start speaking up about it that you can't expect representatives to represent those interests if they don't know about those interests. If all they hear about is from a Monsanto lobbyist or the American Farm Bureau lobbyist talking about, oh, you got to do it this way, you got to do it this way, that's how they're gonna focus on things.
It's the same answer. It's always us. It begins and ends with us. If we don't fix it, nobody else is going to fix it for us.
And the reality is, if you look at the Congress, okay, and you look where the votes are, they're not in the rural section, okay? Just getting it called a food and farm bill, frankly, is a first step, because the more we connect this to our communities here and urban communities, those votes follow. The Monsanto's impact on, Jan Schakowsky is a poor example, but on a suburban legislator, congressperson, is not that strong in the face of her constituents speaking. It is strong in the rural areas, but there's only X number of votes, and those votes are a minority. But historically, the suburban and urban land legislatures, Congress people, have simply said, that's what my colleague wants, I'm trading votes, it doesn't really matter to my constituents. So it is a political question. I think I would disagree a little bit with, maybe because I'm an optimist, long term. Short term, I think droughts are going to get much worse. And I think what you're going to see is suddenly people starting to say, wow, we need a broad spectrum of responses that speak to both resilience and response to climate change, not just preventing climate change. Soil organic matter is actually one of those areas that potentially has a huge, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but if you look at the numbers that Wes put up there, 50-some% of American land is
it's
agriculture.
over majority, yeah.
Okay. Think about what happens if you change the organic matter in the top 18 inches of that soil by one percentage point of soil organic matter. The impact is dramatically greater than all the tree planting we can do in terms of fixing carbon. Okay. So it's both slows climate change and, frankly, gives you a resilience or a resistance strategy. So that as that science starts to get better and more focused on that, I think you will see changes.
And it sounds negative, but the positive of it, if we have another, all it's going to take is another 2012 drought or a couple more of those 2012 droughts, and you're going to see the crop insurance system is going to collapse under itself. And we're going to be forced as a country really we're going to have to answer and ask those tough questions. So it may be coming. It may have to get worse before it gets better, but
I think it will. I don't think it might,
yeah.
unfortunately.
2012 was exacerbated by the fires starting out west in the summer, and so not just in corn and other commodity crops, but also livestock farmers in Oregon and Montana and other places were wiped out by the fires. So you're right.
Well, they were wiped out by drought, too.
Drought too was exacerbating it, and so depending on your farming style, you're absolutely right. The insurance system is both what happened then. That's an excellent question. What happens then?
And that was,
At the lower level of food chain.
and there were people as part of the Farm Bill debate that were trying to raise this point. The new Farm Bill, it eliminated, I said, that direct payment subsidies, put most of that money into new revenue insurance. So they basically expanded the whole crop insurance system, which is not really actuarially sound. It's not a traditional insurance system. It relies on federal subsidies for it to work. And in these debates, people brought up these exact issues. Another 2012 drought, throw in a couple other circumstances, and the whole, the cost to the American public for crop insurance subsidies is just going to shoot through the roof. And we might then have to ask ourselves, can we continue to put this kind of money, throw good money after bad money, or should we start investing in conservation? One thing that I think is historically interesting to point out on the whole politics of the Farm Bill, the reason there is the food stamps, the nutrition piece to the Farm Bill was exactly because of the changing demographics. The farm community, legislators that represented farm interests, realized that the demographics were against them and basically combined together with the anti-hunger community to create the Farm Bill, which is nutrition and farm programs. They both go together hand in hand because if they split the two apart, neither happens.
So on a slightly optimistic note then, I'm afraid that we have to conclude our discussion. If some of the speakers would like to stay around and answer some questions or engage in some discussions, I'm sure we would welcome that. But right now, I just want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting together another incredibly timely and informative program for all of us to enjoy this evening. Thank you very much.